The question is that the notice of motion as moved by the member for Sydney be agreed to. I call the member for Newtown.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to seek leave to make
Is
a contribution
leave granted?
to the debate.
Leave granted.
Thank you. I wish to also thank the member for Sydney for working collaboratively with this chamber to enable this motion to be reordered so that we have the opportunity to speak on it today. Seeking asylum is a human right. No one is illegal. Over many years, while working for Amnesty International, I was closely connected with campaigns to protect and defend the rights of asylum seekers and of refugees in Australia and across the globe. While working for Amnesty in London, I worked closely with human rights advocates and Middle East experts on what, at that stage, was the emerging human rights crisis in Syria. In 2011, I found myself with a megaphone and a group of Syrian human rights activists and human rights campaigners on the pavement outside of the United Nations building in New York, standing there in my role as a crisis campaigner with Amnesty's head office, calling for global action to respond to what that stage was thousands of innocent civilians that had died and were fleeing persecution and violence. Today, that number has reached the tragedy of 250,000 men, women and children who have died. I am proud to be in this chamber representing a party, which is the Greens, that have had a long and strong and proud tradition of standing up for the compassionate treatment of asylum seekers and refugees. It was, in fact, the compassionate words of the former Greens leader, Bob Brown, that inspired me to get involved in politics and is the reason why I now find myself standing here in this place. So it is with much pleasure that we are showing a sense of compassion and leadership towards responding to a much-needed issue of the treatment of asylum seekers in this country, now in this chamber. President of the Australian Human Rights Commission, Gillian Triggs, confirmed this morning that there are Syrians currently living on Manus Island and Nauru in detention, as well as Syrians living in the community on temporary protection visas in this country. There are Syrians, we know, being held in mandatory detention in Villawood, just a short, less than an hour train ride away from here in a jurisdiction that we cover. So we must remember that this is not just a problem happening overseas and elsewhere. The violations of people's human rights are happening in our jurisdiction, in this, our city of Sydney, and this state where we gather to represent its people. I acknowledge the compassionate words of the New South Wales Premier, as many have done, and the recent compassionate act taken by this government to grant travel concessions to asylum seekers. Yeah. Given the detention of Syrians and many others are happening now and in our city, I do question, though, is there a way that we could be doing more? Today, I recognise and respect that we are moving and working together in a spirit of collaboration, and so something that for so long has been missing from this debate. And so I do not wish to be moving amendments or expressing changes that I think to this motion that we will grant consensus on. But I would wonder if in this chamber we would get agreement on calling for an end to the mandatory detention of asylum seekers in the state of New South Wales. I wonder if we would be able to join together and show compassion to say that we did not want people living in our state that were subject to the inhumane treatment of living on temporary protection visas. At the very least, surely if we are collectively recognising the humanitarian disaster in Syria, we can all agree that we should immediately accept the applications of those from Syria currently in our detention centres, those currently locked up in Manus Island and Nauru, and move swiftly to grant asylum to those Syrians currently living in limbo on temporary protection visas in our community. As a Parliament, in the spirit of this motion, let us also ensure in the coming weeks that we provide the support, financial support, services support needed to be able to assist those being relocated to our state. I thank the member for Sydney again for allowing us to consider this important matter.